We're back with another episode of the Zealous Podcast. I'm Rocky Snyder. This week, I invite Angeleau Scott on to the show. He is with the San Antonio Spurs, one of the assistant performance coaches with San Antonio, but also he is the head strength coach for the G League Spurs. That's the Austin Spurs. We're going to talk about basketball conditioning and more. Stay tuned. Be sure to follow us on Instagram at Rocky_Snyder and hit that subscribe button. Tell a few friends. Enjoy the show. Angeleau, I'm excited to have you on the Zealous Podcast, a young strength coach making your way up into this ladder of success. You know, before we were on the air here, you were telling me you spent some time in Southern California with San Diego Padres, but now you're with San Antonio Spurs, about to kick off the season with them. In fact, you are the head strength coach for the Austin Spurs, which is the G League. And for those listening on the West Coast, of course, you got the NBA champion Golden State Warriors. Well, here in my hometown, Santa Cruz, we've got the Santa Cruz Warriors. So I know we'll probably be bumping heads sometime this season as the Spurs meet the Warriors or vice versa. But first, welcome to the show. And I would love to know how you got to where you are right now. Internships, volunteer, lucky knocks on the door, or whatever they are. Give it to me.
No, definitely. Thank you, Rocky, for having me on the podcast. And I just want to say thank you. This is a great opportunity, and it's just wonderful to share ideas and just talk to other people in the field, how we can help the field get better and just how we can help athletes get better as a whole.
Right on.
So just thank you in general. But I was going to say kind of a little bit about me. I initially did my undergraduate degree in exercise science and minored in biology, almost double major, but I stuck with a minor there. And then I actually did my master's in biomechanics at the University of Nebraska at Omaha, worked with tremendous professors and just many great people in my department, you could say colleagues or my friends that I actually got to hang out with outside of the work setting. Great individuals, learned a tremendous amount about biomechanics, the in-depth, and how you can actually use that to apply that to sport and how you can help athletes in general from different perspectives. From there, during my time, I actually worked as a performance coach under an owner of a private training facility, First Peak Performance. His name was Grant, and he was a great boss and taught me a lot of how to actually apply that to many youth athletes, as well as professional athletes that he worked with as well. But during that time, I also did an internship with the University of Nebraska Athletics in Lincoln. And there I interned during my undergrad as a strength conditioning intern with Husker Power. And then during my master's period, I actually interned with the sports science under Dr. Chris Bach, and he is a great professional. He's doing great things where he is at in the NFL now, as well as many of the other resources and just individuals that I worked with around. They taught me so much about how to actually think critically when you're doing any athletic monitoring, or actually think critically when you're working with an athlete or a high performance setting. And they show me tremendous amounts of compassion, love, and just how to do your best, and understanding that not everything will go right, but all you can do is just work with the constraints that you have and have fun every day while you're doing it. After that time, when I was at University of Nebraska, University of Nebraska at Omaha during my master's, I received an offer as an internship with the San Diego Padres. I was out in the Phoenix, Peoria, Glendale area. And from there, I was doing a sports science, but I was also, you could say, a hybrid role. And I was acting as a strength conditioning coach for many of the position players, infielders, outfielders, catchers, and helping with the pitchers as well as helping out on sports science duties as they needed with their various systems that they had in place there. And from there, I was actually working out one morning. And I received a call from the San Antonio Spurs, and I'll say the rest is history, because history is always in the making. But I actually received that offer and took time to think about it, as anyone should. I loved where I was at with the Padres. They're a great organization, great people, from front office to anyone else working in any of the affiliates. They're just tremendous people, and the athletes, you could say, great guys just to know and to learn from and work with. So from there, I made thought about it, prayed about it, talked with family, and I made the decision to go to San Antonio Spurs. And from here, I've only been here not the longest time, but it's been a great time while I'm here. Just great athletes. Basketball has always been my love and my favorite sport. But working with guys who are just from various backgrounds, various settings, as well as just coming together to work our hardest to do our best to be the best that we can be every day. And I think that speaks to the organization itself. So that's
Right.
right now.
That's great, Angelo. So I'm curious. You mentioned that you had your master's in biomechanics. Did you
Yes,
have to do a thesis? And if so, what was the title of your thesis?
yes, I did, and it was the relationship of shoulder strength, and looking at the kinetic and kinematic variables and pictures. That was the actual thesis that I did for my master's.
Tell me more. What did you find out?
Mhm. Yeah, I was primarily looking at just the correlation, you could say, essentially, of looking at various things using ice kinetic dynamometer, just shoulder strength, of pictures, and kind of looking at torque values there, and correlating that with their 3D kinematic and kinetic variables that was obtained through motion capture. So, using the systems that we had in place and the technology that we had, and working with some great individuals, not only my person who was my advisor, but my colleagues around who were not only PhD students, but master students as well. They all helped me to do my best to actually learn how to not only just be better at research and how to read research articles in general, but to just learn more about how you can apply science and sport and using that to help athletes actually increase their performance as well as just help them understand a little bit more about their body and how the forces and actually what they're producing when they're actually doing these movements.
So, with the kinematic sequence, taken from a graph perspective, and you're going to have peaks and you're going to have curves, you're going to have somewhat flat zones. There's an optimal kind of path
Mhm.
that an athlete could take for the most efficient action of throwing a baseball, shall we say? Or was it a baseball throw or was it swinging the bat? Which one was it?
Um, yes, baseball though.
Baseball throw. Okay. Now, the, what you're going to find obviously is that there is a certain path that is ideal, but how many of the athletes that you tested were aberrations, were outside of the ideal? You know, how far did they deviate from, we'll call it the standard or the average?
Yeah, I truly cannot answer that question because for my study, I didn't look at the kinematic sequence necessarily. I was looking more at just the shoulder strength. But I mean,
Ah,
there is research out there where you can find throughout the literature and growing literature with baseball throughout, you can see various kinematic and kinetic differences. But in my experience working with athletes and various technologies, I have seen that you can see differences. And actually, my personal experience working with various athletes and who are baseball players, I worked with them actually in their batting. So I've seen actually kinematic sequences in their batting, and I have seen differences from there. But in terms of my research personally, I haven't actually dealt with looking at kinematic sequences.
okay. So when it comes to the shoulder strength, was there relationships to, did you measure, you were saying you were making some other measurements along the chain, such as like, is it hip power production? Were you looking at that in regards to the relationship to shoulder strength?
I thought about that, but primarily just stayed with the upper extremity and kind of looking at, you could say, for example, ball velocity and correlating that with, say, something such as internal rotation velocity of the shoulder. So that I kind of stayed on the upper extremity side,
I
but
see.
there is growing body of research looking at the lower extremity and as well as current research that you can look at things relating to the lower extremity and the production of force there.
All right. Okay. So then, taking that kind of information, your education, and switching from baseball to basketball, what have you had to? What did you take with you? What kind of information are you utilizing with basketball players that you were using with the baseball players? How does it carry over, and what doesn't really carry over?
Oh, truly, definitely. That's a great question. And I would say, obviously, there's technology differences. You might not necessarily always do the same assessments or drills that you would use with one piece of technology and apply that to a different sport. I mean, definitely you could, but obviously it depends on what the goals and what you're looking for, KPIs, whatever specifically you're trying to identify for that group of athletes. But I would say one thing, and it might sound a little cliche, but it's the care for your athletes, regardless of with your whatever protocols that you have in place with, say, for example, baseball, going to basketball, you don't necessarily have to always have the same um, same principles in mind, but you have to have the same values in mind. And you can go on a tangent about differences between your principles and values, but truly just caring about your athletes. And I would say understanding that you do need to look at some things, and depending on where you go, you might have access to various technologies, but looking at, say, for example, hamstring strength, you can look at hip strength, you can look at things such as their gait mechanics. Those things are, you could say, foundational things that you should, you might not always have the access, but if you do have the access or ability to, just identifying those things to get a more well-rounded perspective that if you can, your athletes individually, but if not, looking at your group as a whole so that you can just understand where we're at as an athletic performance development. And then obviously you have various interventions through your sports medicine or your sports science and conditioning in which you can apply what you see through these various performance assessments and actually make interventions to help them perform actually in their sports setting, say example basketball.
Well, you obviously have had some really powerful mentors in your time, because caring for the athlete is a very underlying theme to many of previous guests that have been on the podcast, such I'm just thinking off the top of my head, Marty Lazon, who is the medical director of sports performance for the Atlanta Hawks. And then more recently, Josh Corbeil, who has been head athletic trainer and also director of medical for the Indiana Pacers for almost 20 years now. And I'm asking them similar questions, and the top answer is you just got to care for the athletes. And that's really what it comes down to. You can get lost in technology quite readily these days, and there's so much out there that we can test, and we can dive deep into the forest without seeing that, without caring for the trees, so to speak, themselves. And with basketball players, heck, they're tall as trees. So I guess that's a pretty good analogy there. Let's shift over to this. You know, you're going to be with the Austin Spurs G League. It's kicking off real soon, isn't it? When's your first game?
We got it coming up pretty soon. The schedule's coming up. I'll have to double check things, but we kind of mainly get to the meat of things starting in November. That's when things are really going to start to kick off.
Yeah, so you're getting ready to get over there and get some preseason conditioning with your players. Now, when it comes to the strength conditioning programs, you being the head strength coach for the Austin Spurs, how are you developing your program? I imagine it's in concert and with guidance from your boss, the performance director, or the lead strength coach for the entire organization. But how's that happening? How are you forming that?
Yeah, no, definitely. So with the performance staff that we have, it's myself and just a few other performance coaches. And we obviously, it's a huge communication thing. You're always speaking with not only sports scientists, strength conditioning coaches, sports medicine, but everything is always constant communication. We develop our programs based upon really truly the needs of the athletes. And we always just kind of alluding back to what I was saying before, we always have that athlete center what's best for them, making sure that they're healthy and that everybody's on the same page. So it's truly developing a program to make sure that the athlete's needs are fit and that it fits within the whole system that we're trying to develop to make sure that they're performing their best.
So if we had like a pie chart and we put different elements of conditioning, strength training being one of them, speed, agility, quickness, mobility. Yeah, basically, how do you lay that out, if I could ask? I mean, I don't want to get trade secrets or anything going on here, but how much are you putting into, say, explosive lifts, unilateral versus bilateral? How much are you working on linear versus omnidirectional speed? Can you give me the rundown?
Definitely, I would say if you had that pie, if you could split that thing up pretty evenly, you can have a good picture. So I would say trying to always have hit on all points is very key. Not only just in any organization that you're in, but just make sure that your athlete is completely okay from a well-rounded perspective. Obviously, and you may have heard this from other people on your podcast before, but you can say that strength is always a huge factor in making sure that you have a good foundation of strength. So definitely spending a good amount of time on strength, depending on your actual time period that you are in your season, for just any athlete in general. But I would say definitely making sure that they have a good, solid foundation of strength. So just because you have tall, maybe short athletes, I would say keeping that strength foundation is always important. Things will take care of itself you may have heard in various either papers, books, having a good, you could say aerobic or just good base of conditioning, just in case you were going to be doing running or any type of linear movements or curvilinear movements. You just always want to actually have a good foundation of whether it's a strength when we're lifting or actual say in some type of anaerobic or aerobic base when you're doing some type of running drills.
Yeah, makes sense. Okay, so when it comes down to foundational strength, what are the main lifts that are going to be in your program, and maybe include some of the accessory lifts that you'll be putting in on, in general for the team?
Now that I truly can't tell you just because kind of have to keep things on the personal side. I will have to say that, but I will say that you do want to hit a little bit of everything, and you can say that sometimes you'll have your barbell days, sometimes you will have your dumbbell days, hitting your dumbbell bench press and your barbell bench press, depending on the athletes that you work with. You just want to make sure that you're always protecting the back and make sure you're loading the spine in the correct times, correct manner, depending on, say, any type of contradictions that they may have. And you always have to, again, that comes back to that communication portion, making sure that if that athlete has any type of things that you need to be careful or watch out, making sure that you're talking with sports medicine or whoever may be in that medical higher position in which you need to actually communicate with. So I would just say in general, making sure that you have, kind of alluding back to your question, you want to make sure that sometimes you will hit your barbells, sometimes you will hit your dumbbells, depending on your access to things. If you're on the road, you might not have access to 10 barbells. Some days, if you're at home, you might have access to more things. So just playing that by a day-by-day basis. Sometimes, and I say, if you're on a road or say a sport such as baseball or basketball, you might not always have access to as many barbells. So making sure that you know how to use dumbbells and manipulate that in various ways. That's something that's very important too.
So yeah, barbells, dumbbells, they're definitely take up room and they're hard for shipping. So how much conditioning do you use with, say, resistance bands and cable systems? I mean, that must be part of your program too. But without getting into the full nitty gritty of it, is that something that's easily a travel kit that you have in the hotel rooms?
I'll say it's not always the easiest thing to have in a travel kit, but I will say having bands is something that is essential. Say if there's an exercise that you can perform on the cable, it's something that maybe you can actually use in terms of some type of band variation. Me personally, I do, and many of the athletes that I like to work with, I do like to use bands if any time that I can. Any type of things that work on anti-rotation, sometimes anti-extension or anti-flexion, depending on the circumstance. But definitely anti-rotation, keeping that core tight and braced. That's something that I truly do find is very useful, and I personally like to involve that in my programming.
Okay, when it comes to determining lifts for individual athletes, what kind of screening process, assessment tool, when do you know when they are ready to perform a certain movement? Do you have criteria that you're creating or have laid out already that they must meet?
Myself as a strength conditioning coach, not necessarily, but that's more so, and depends on the setting that you're in. Working alongside and communicating with sports medical staff or sports science, and then creating those protocols or going based off protocols that are already in place. Communicating with them to make sure they have the proper screening, since again, sometimes as a strength conditioning coach can always provide, say, medical care to an athlete. So you have to understand what actual protocols are already in place, working with those, and then using, say, various technologies to help screen those that as a strength conditioning coach you are allowed to. Not only that I have worked with in the past, but you can see various technologies, say, many people in terms of screening, say, hamstring strength, you could look at a Nord board, for example, or looking at hip abduction or adduction, you can use a groin bar or a force frame. So those are just examples of things that, say, under the scope of a strength conditioning coach, you can actually do those things. But in terms of actual screening processes, you do want to communicate with whoever is, your sports medical staff. You want to make sure that you have those things understood. And that is sometimes personal conversations that you have alongside with them. Depending on the setting, you can have the athlete there and making sure that everybody is on board to make sure that they're performing optimal.
Yeah, got you. Okay. So the G League in the season, there's 50 games. But in the NBA, I think there's 82. So there's obviously a big difference there between the two of them. How does that affect program design, frequency of load, perhaps, or how does that vary from G League programming to NBA programming in general? You don't have to give exact specifics, but they've got to be different, right?
You definitely want to make sure that you're keeping all your athletes, say, on a similar scope. All your athletes, whether they're on the main roster that's playing that longer season, or you have athletes who are on the G League roster, you want to make sure that they are all performing optimally. Sometimes that means that they're doing similar workouts. Maybe sometimes things are tweaked, but you want to try to keep things consistent so that they're all performing optimally, because everybody personally as an athlete, you want to be on that court, you want to be on the front scene, you want to be on the biggest stage performing at your highest level optimally. And so you have to train optimally. That can be, again, as you know, in various settings, you might have flexibility or limitability, but if you're really encouraged and motivated and focused, you'll find a way to get things done. And then again, some people say that Rome wasn't built in a night. That saying, I just understand and know personally that you can't build anything immediately. So you have to understand that some things are a day-by-day progression. You have to understand that as a coach, you can't always go with your way is the right way. You have to truly listen to your athletes, understand feedback is important. There's various things, and you can go into load monitoring and various technologies, but understanding that an athlete's feedback, sometimes subjective or objective, is truly very important, because you need to know if your athlete is feeling a certain way, if they're ready to go. Let's go a little bit harder. Maybe if we need to dial it down, we can look at a more objective way through some type of load monitoring technology, or subjective way in their response. And this way we can actually see how can we actually go based on them. And again, as I said, that's a day-by-day thing. So have your plan in place as a strength coach, but understand that things can definitely adapt and be flexible depending on how your athletes are feeling.
Yeah, makes complete sense. Okay. We've got different elements within athleticism for a professional basketball player: anaerobic recovery, explosiveness in the form of vertical jump, but also sprint. How fast can they get down the court? And to be honest, like in the last 10 years, the NBA has changed in regards to some of the fundamental strategies, such as we're seeing a lot more perimeter shooting, a lot more out in the three-point land. And that has changed a lot of the physical demands. You're not having as many bodies bumping under the boards, trying to box out for rebounds or whatever. So that also too is going to affect conditioning of the players. How is that affecting the way in which you condition the players now going into the season? Do you have a lot of shooters on the 3-point line, or do you have the bigger guys that are going to be putting bodies on? I mean, there's some teams that are like the Warriors themselves, pretty small, but then you got other teams that can put a lot of big guys out there. Does that affect how you create programming for your athletes?
Truly, it depends on the athlete, but you understand that at the end of the day, all guys have to get up and down the court regardless. You do have to understand the actual energy system requirements of the position. So you may have to understand that your guards may be having, you could say in generally, a faster time, or compared to a big who may be a little bit larger foot, limb size, and they might be a little bit slower. I mean, there are some of those guys you have that are anomalies who are big and fast, or maybe small and slow. So athletes come in various sizes, just like humans come in various sizes. So you have to know your athlete for one, but you also have to understand that, just as I said, you have to get them up and down regardless. So you have to keep most of the things the same, by understanding that you have to get them at a certain aerobic level, have to have them ready to perform, because you need your athletes ready to have that conditioning base for them to be fast when they need to be fast, or maybe dial it down when you need to dial it down. So understanding that some athletes may be faster and then some athletes may be slower, you have to keep that in play depending on your conditioning that you have in play and that you're actually programming. But in terms of actually how you're going to go about your way, you have to try to keep things the same, but truly just understand that energy system requirement.
Okay. And then as you begin to, or not begin, but continue to educate yourself and build experience, are there different avenues that you're investigating right now that you're looking personally and professionally that you're intrigued by? And if so, where is your focus? Where is your antenna directed when it comes to performance? What are you looking into?
Or am I looking into? I am looking into my current day that I have right now. I've never been somebody to look too far into the future or look at things. I do have plans in place on things that I want to do over time, but I overall, for my performance, I just want to make sure that the athletes that I'm working at are performing optimally. I'm always having my different scopes and different areas of my brain thinking about different things and making sure that sometimes I want to make sure, hey, I got this athlete here, he's doing great, he's healthy, let me keep this way, or maybe I can optimize him depending on the day and how he's feeling. But I'm always keeping a perspective on the needs of the athlete, for one, making sure that they're having the essentials that they need to perform their best, not only on games, but on practices, as well as recover their best, because as many of us know, that recovery is a huge portion of just life in general, not only for an athlete, but anybody who's not in a professional or a collegiate or even an athlete in general, just making sure that you're keeping yourself healthy. So that's where truly my mind is at, making sure that I meet the needs of my athletes, making sure they're getting what they need and that they're performing their best. And at the end of the day, they can come back and say, hey, thank you. I appreciate your help. And I'm doing my best. And so that's all I want, my focus.
Well, I kind of mean more like pursuing information about sleep, the importance of sleep and recovery, like you mentioned, recovery, or the value of proper hydration and how do we actually properly rehydrate the body, or is it fueling? Like, is there optimal fueling? What type of foods are going to be best pre-game, post-game, or when it comes to anything like that? Like, are there things that are curious to you aside from your day-to-day? Like, is it gait mechanics? Is it are there any kind of elements or departments of thought that you're going, okay, I want to learn more about proper breathing techniques, sleep cycles, or what? Is there anything like that you're doing right now?
Yeah, truly, I watch athletes run, and something that is curious to me is understanding that I've seen athletes. I mean, I was a sprinter myself in college. There's various forms of running techniques that you can have. Obviously, you're trying to work toward an optimal thing that you can actually focus and apply that into the actual sport itself. But there's various research papers out there and studies probably currently being conducted between the differences between, you could say, team sport athletes and more solo, if you want to say, athletes who are more, say, your singles tennis players, your track runners, still may be on a team base, but you're actually performing on an individual basis. So that's something also I am truly interested in. I try to look at a diverse amount of literature. I have some tabs open on my computer at the moment that I have nutrition, I have biomechanics, I have exercise physiology, I have recovery. So I like to hit a little bit on, you can say, all the topics, just so if I can say I read a little bit, that's something actually I can apply to my athletes. That's something that is very important for me to take away. Understanding that I may not be a specialist in biomechanics, I may not be a specialist in exercise physiology, nutrition, but there are various people in the world who are professionals. And if I can understand a little bit more from them and their basis and maybe their specialty and what they publish or what they actually know, then I can gain a little bit from them and actually apply that and just use that knowledge and help my athletes the best. Currently, yeah. I do talk to our nutritionist on the team very frequently about how I can help best supplement the athletes that I have and that I work with. and just in any way can I help them on that nutritional aspect. So say if I'm communicating with sports medicine, I want to make sure that they're obviously functioning and healthy. If I'm communicating maybe on a more nutritional basis, I talk to our nutritionist, and various just portions maybe on the data side, I talk to sports scientists. Just gotta have to be well-rounded. Again, you may not know everything, but you have to be able to understand the audience that you have and how you can just take a little bit of something, internally process that, and then apply it to your athletes when needed.
Okay, so knowing the audience is a good topic right there. And along with that, it comes buy-in. Like here's some athletes of varying ages. Some in the G League, this is their last hope to make it up to the NBA, to the big games, and they're near the shall we say the winter of their careers. They're not the spring chicken, the 18, 19-year-olds. These guys are in their 30s potentially. And how do you, couple questions here, how do you create buy-in with the players that you're working with? And after we talk about that, I'd love to talk about the difference between age ranges on the team, not players by name or anything, but how do you deal with the younger players compared to the older players? So first, tell me about how do you cultivate buy-in with the players?
For me personally, I would say cultivating buy-in is just being a human being. There's so many ways you can try to dive into how I can think about this way and this way that I can actually get an athlete to do something, or you can truly be a human being and just be a personable person, just understanding yourself and understanding them on a humanistic perspective. How you don't have, maybe not have to go or know everything about an individual's athlete's life, but letting them know that I'm a person, you're a person, and that I can help you educate something if there's something that maybe the organization or any organization wants to have an athlete buy into. Just understanding that, hey, I wouldn't be doing this if I didn't want it for your benefit. That's truly the best way that I have found in my experiences to help an athlete just buy into something, understanding that an athlete's knowledge is not just their knowledge of their sport itself that they're maybe very good at, but they're knowledgeable about things outside of the sport as well. So anything to help an athlete, educate an athlete on the reason why they might be doing something and the benefit toward them, that's something that truly is important. So not lying, just being straightforward and being a human, being a kind person. And myself being a pretty young individual comparatively to many professionals in the field that I look up to and I learn from, I would say an age factor is something that's maybe on my side because I am a young individual and working with athletes who are around my age range, maybe older, maybe younger. I have that, you could say, that happy medium in which I can reach a younger audience because I am youthful, but also reaching a slightly older audience because I can be professional in that setting too.
Yeah, and then in regards to like program design, are there certain elements within the program that you begin to focus more upon when we're talking about the younger players compared to those that are more of the seasoned veterans? For instance, are you more concerned with foundational strength, explosive power, and recovery with the younger players, and with the older players more about injury prevention, mobility, pliability, resiliency? You know what I'm getting at? Like, is there a spectrum that as the player ages through their career, there's a shift in program design based upon that?
I think that is something that you should very much keep in mind. Currently, I am young in my experiences. I haven't had to deal with many athletes who are, say, at that point in their career, but that is a great, important piece that you do have athletes who have been in whatever setting, any professional or collegiate experience, and they have been through the grind, they've been through the process, and say, you may not have to load them with a lot of weight for them to get that same adaptations to perform in their sport. But you do have to understand that recovery, it could be something that takes a little bit more if you have an athlete that is maybe getting up there in age. So you have to always keep that in mind, as well as loading. You can still be explosive. You don't always have to have the most weight to be explosive. And obviously, if we're being explosive, we don't want to have a lot of weight. We want to move things light and quick and get it going. So you can say that you do still want to be explosive, even if you have athletes that are still maybe getting up there in age, but they still have that same sport that they have to perform. You may not have to do it as often to get that same stimulus, but you still should be explosive. Maybe you should actually employ more of that injury prevention exercises or anything that's going to help keep them healthier for a longer period of time. Having that sustainability as maybe a basketball, baseball, and various other sports, it can be a long season. So you want to make sure that you're keeping them healthy for as long as you can. Just because it is a long season, that doesn't mean that you have to take it completely off. And just because it is a long season, doesn't mean you have to go super hard. You want to have that happy medium, and you want to just be consistent and making sure that we're not always going to be going as hard. And again, some athletes may not need as much at that moment. Some athletes may need less to perform to their optimal. And that age spectrum, it just varies. You can have an athlete who is very maybe getting up there in their age and preparing for their time to actually leave their sport, but their body is just as sharp as someone who's just coming in. So it truly depends. But I truly can't give you the full in depth because I haven't got to that point in my career where I've worked with that many athletes who have been up there. But I would say you have to definitely make sure that you're keeping them healthy because it may take them longer to recover, but you do want to keep that energy up because they have to get that sport done somehow.
Sure. No, that makes complete sense. Now, for you personally, why exercise science? Why striving to be a performance coach, strength coach, and what was it early on? Like when was it something that happened as a kid? Or did you have a phenomenal coach? Did you have just great progress in the weight room, or what inspired this?
Truly, I would say it's the people around me. I mean, I like to talk about my faith openly. I'm a Christian, and I feel like sometimes a Christian is always working hard to be your best, but understanding you're not the most important person in the world, that people around you is what makes your life important. So that's something that speaks to the sport overall for me, is making sure that you're working your hardest to be your best and do your best every day. And for me, a strength coach is sometimes where that starts for athletes. Sometimes they need that extra mode. They have it within them, and everybody has it within them, but they need that person to help push them. For myself, growing up, I played instruments as a young kid, but I actually never did sports until I was in middle school. So there's many youth athletes who are much further ahead of me in terms of their athletic abilities. And so I had to do a lot of catching up to get up to their performance in a short amount of time to get it and to make a varsity level in high school. So I had to make a lot of extra work. And for me, that was a personal motivational thing. Not only my parents and friends supporting me, but something that I always wanted to do. And for me, that just carries on to life. And I feel that the career that really represents that is a strength and conditioning coach, because you're not only working hard and helping influence someone in terms of their athletic performance from a very, you could say, an evidence-based approach, but you're making sure that someone is living their best life mentally, physically, and overall to be their best person. And again, for me, that all comes back to my faith as a Christian. And I feel that those things tied perfectly. And so that's why any way that I can help the field or help any individual be their best is something that I care about. And also, I was just going to continue on that. I was going to say many of the people around me, like coaches growing up, for me, I'll name a couple names: the Coach Zimmermans for football, the Coach Battles for basketball, the Grants, the many of even the professionals I work with, the Coach Mike Keels, and if they ever hear this podcast, they'll know who they are. But those people have been great influences on me. The teachers, my parents, they have been truly always supportive of me, loving me. And so I feel that all that, and name a few more names, a physical therapist that I know, Sean, a data scientist that I know, Kate, just so many individuals. And there's so much more people that I could go on and talk with. But anybody who knows me or I know them Even if I wasn't friends with them, all of those people have played some type of role in my life to one, get me where I am, but to also truly just help me keep myself motivated and focused to continually pursue knowledge through article readings, through courses, and just be my best. And I would say all those people, and for sure, God, those are all. That's how I feel that. That's why I like this career and how I can keep pushing it in any way possible.
Well, right on. I mean, for myself, going through school, I was not an exercise science major at all. It was something that happened after I went through school. I was actually literature, English major, more or less. And so I love learning what motivates people. And when you got to school, you decided exercise science. You could have decided economics. You could have decided political theory or psychology or pre-med or law, but you chose exercise science.
And actually, kind of, oh, sorry, excuse me. I was going to say, to kind of jump on that point,
Yeah.
coming into my undergrad, I actually was, say, pre-medical or biology major, but say there's some courses that maybe didn't play out in my favor, and just good timing and things, I applied to PA schools for physician assistants. I applied to those various professions, and I actually didn't get accepted. So that turned me to just continually work my hardest. And as any athlete knows, that when the sport's over, or when you're, say, done with your collegiate or high school career, or even professional, there's still that part of you that you miss the sport, you love it, and you want to be a part of that in some way. And so for me, even though I wasn't always an athlete, I still keep up with my physical health through just exercise in general, but making sure that if I can't maybe necessarily play the sport at the moment, I'm going to maybe do it on my own time or just stay healthy, but I'm actually going to help the next generation of athletes, or any athletes that are currently playing. If I can be in their space and help them be their best, because I trust in my abilities, I trust in the people around me to help me learn to be the best. I think just being the best, it can help others be their best.
I love it. I love the fact that this brings us actually closer in regards to our paths. And what I mean by that is you had certain intentions or preferences that for whatever reason weren't necessarily going to go your way, but you focused on what you could do in the moment, and you worked hard and excelled in the direction that you could go. You weren't going to try and hit your head against a wall, but there was a hallway that you could follow. And if doors opened up, you could explore those directions. And if you found that that was where your passion continued to go, you would go hard in it. And I think for both of us that happened. So it's kind of nice to hear that story. Oh, that's beautiful. Now, okay, kind of finishing up here. You kind of geek out on sports science from the sound of it. Like early in our conversation, you were talking a lot about sports science. But when I think about sports science, I still don't have a clear, definitive understanding of what is involved with sports science, because it's a relatively new term, and we've got a whole bunch of people that have the role of sports scientist. What does that mean to you? What is sports science, Angeleau?
I think you and I both, we do not have a definition currently, but I would say truly it's, anybody can have their own definition of it, but I would say truly applying various principles of science. It can be not only physics, your biologies, your chemistry, is applying that and actually making that applicable in sport. There is that gap, as you know, between, say, current literature and actually the process of performing research in an educational standpoint and actually applying it in, say, a high performance standpoint and actually sport in professional or collegiate. There's always going to be some type of gap, but sports science, strength conditioning professionals who may understand a little bit about that, and even not only just strength conditioning, you could say PTs, anybody in the sports medicine realm, nutritionists. I feel like sports science is an area in which we can all blend what that science, those required science courses that we have in college for sure, using that and then applying it to sport. I think that is how we can actually understand, and even not only say your physical sciences, your biologies, chemistries, and physics, but your data sciences. So understanding various programming languages, helping that to analyze large bodies of data, that is all very important for making sure that we have an evidence-based approach to not only analyze any data that's captured through technology, but we're applying that and making sure that maybe we don't use 100 of our rows that we have, but making sure that we have at least something that we can use this data that we capture through some type of technology and making that applicable to an athlete or helping them out in any way. Not everything is going to work every time. Not everything is going to work on the time that you think it's going to work. So you have to understand that it's a patient process, but using scientific principles to make it applicable in sport is something that everybody in a high performance setting can do. And sometimes there is more of a role of the data science, depending on the questions that you're trying to ask. So that can be something that's more on a sports scientist role. But I believe that the definition of a sports scientist is subjective, and it's, even though we try to make things as objective as possible, it's something that will always be subjective in terms of that definition. So you have to make sure that you're doing your best to apply the scientific foundations, keeping the practicality always present, because that's actually what get things done. You can't always perform every analysis while you're actually performing a sport. So you have to understand that the sport will always exist, even if maybe the science, you don't always have the technology available. So you have to understand that practicality in the sport will always exist and supplement that with the scientific foundations.
Right on. Well, Angeleau, this has been a great conversation. I really appreciate putting aside some time. And I know right now, looking at the G League schedule for this season, now, are you traveling with the team? Do you know yet whether you'll be traveling with them?
Yes, I will be. Mm-hmm.
All right. Then we've got to have lunch either on February 22nd or February 24th when you're in Santa Cruz, because that's when Austin comes to face the Warriors. So if there's a little bit of time we can eke out, we'll have to meet face to face, because it'd be a pleasure to shake your hand. And it's been a pleasure to have you on here, truly.
It would be a pleasure to meet you as well. And I just want to say thank you again for inviting me to be on your podcast here. It's great things. I've definitely listened to it myself. So to all the guests that you have on previously and going forward, I'll say they're blessed to be on your podcast, because it's very informative and very something that's special and is very feeding to the field of, you could say, the multidisciplinary field of sports science, nutrition, strength and conditioning. You're definitely getting all the points. So thank you very much for having me. I appreciate it.
It is a pleasure. Thank you. And that brings this episode of the Zealous Podcast to a close. I want to thank the Spurs organization as well, of course, as Angeleau Scott for coming on and sharing his experiences with NBA and then some. So if you want to follow Angeleau, check the descriptions below. You can get a sense of where he's going, where he's been, and so on. Follow us on Instagram, as always. Click that subscribe if you haven't. Tell your friends. We'll see you next week.